Hey guys, what's going on? It's Clever Techie, and in this video we're going to be continuing covering top 100 PHP functions that you see highlighted here, starting with parse URL. So parse URL parses a URL and returns its components, and by components they mean scheme, which is the HTTP or HTTPS part, host, port, user, path, query, and fragment. So this function could be useful if, for example, we have a long URL and we don't want to use any irregular expressions. And so let me just give you an example here. So I'm just gonna get this URL, which is Amazon's query, and we're gonna use the function parse URL to parse it out. So parse URL, and then it's going to return a mixed, because okay, so the function, when we use the function without any of these components and without any of these constants, so that means we're not specifying a specific component to extract. So then the function is going to return an array. So this is going to be an array, and we should just use pre-r to print out the array. As you can see here, so the scheme is a HTTPS part, host amazon.com. Then we have a path. So this is the path here. And then we also have a query. So the query was the search that I did for the camcorder, and you can see how we have this nicely organized array with all the elements broken down like this. And to use a PHP's example, if we have all of the components, we can use their example here. And I'm just gonna say the same thing, parse URL, and then let's view that and see what we get. So here are all the elements of the URL, all the components. So we got scheme, which is HTTP, host name, port, username, password, path, query, and finally the fragment, which is the last part of the URL right here with a pound. And just to give you another example of if we wanted to extract a single component from the URL, and I have a URL that I've created here like this. So if we just wanted to extract a single component, say we wanted to extract the password, which is this part, we could say parse URL, and then specify that constant, which is PHP URL pass. And here's all a list of components or constants that you can use with this. And then instead of the array, we're gonna get a string returned by this, because it's a single return string value, so we can just echo this out without using the pre-r function. And then we're just gonna get this single component that we're targeting in the URL. So it's a really useful function to break down all the components of the URL and get them extracted in a nicely organized array or a string of a single value that we're extracting. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to the next function, which is Getargs. And this function pretty much does exactly what it says it does. It returns an array comprising of a function's argument list. So it gets the function's arguments. One thing to note about this function is that it has to be used within another function. Otherwise, it's not gonna work. So let's create a function first. Let's create a basic function that multiplies values together and takes in 3 components, which are 3 numbers. And so inside of this function we can get the arguments by using func Getargs. So we can just do this here. So you notice that I'm using print array because the function is going to return an array of the arguments. That's the reason I'm using print r, and I'm also gonna use the pre-tags so that we can see the array clearly. And then I'm gonna call this function here. So I'm gonna say echo multiply and then some random numbers. So you can see by calling multiply, it triggered, or it called the Getargs function within multiply, and it got all of its arguments in an array. And that's how it works. Also, we can use another very similar function called funcNumArgs, and that's just gonna get the number of arguments in the function, which should be 3 in this case. And I'm also gonna say return num1 times num2 and times num3. Okay. Okay, so you can see that the funcNumArgs gets the number of arguments, which is 3. And then we also got the 480 because we're multiplying all the numbers together. And another thing I want to show you guys is how we can combine these two functions together. So we can create a function called average that's going to average out the numbers together, and it's going to take in however many arguments that we're going to supply here. So let's just say we get 3 numbers, and then what we can do is we can use a function called arraySum together with funcGetArgs. So this first part is going to get the sum of all the arguments of all of these numbers, because arraySum takes in an array and then it's going to use the function funcGetArgs to get all of those arguments, and then we can just divide all of that by funcNumArgs, which is the number of arguments in the function. So that way we'll get the average of the numbers by using this kind of a trick. So we can just say return, and then we're gonna call this function to test this out. So we can just say, so in this case the average should be 12. Let's go ahead and see, and in fact it is 12. And another cool thing about this is we don't have to specify the arguments here. We can just leave them blank, and that way the function is going to know how many arguments are in there because we're using these two functions. So that way we don't have to specify we don't even have to specify the arguments within the function. So it makes the code a lot more cleaner, and it's a pretty cool trick to use these two functions together. Just a little practical example for you guys. Alright, so that's funcGetArgs. Let's move on to the next one, which is AND. Okay, so this function is very similar to reset and next that we've already covered in previous videos. So I'm just gonna quickly create an array here with a bunch of animal names. And so what the AND function does is it points the array pointer to the end of the array. So we should get snake as our last value here if we echo out AND animals. Now what's important to note is that once you use this function, the array pointer is going to stay at this position. So if we echo out current animals, we should get snake again. You see that? So after using this function, it's important to, if we wanted to go back to the end of the array, it's important to reset it. So that will go back to the first value. It will point the array pointer back to the first value, which is wolf in our case. And so that's pretty much it for this function. Let's go to the next one, which is base64 encode. And so this function encodes data with MIME base64, and if you ever received emails and checked the headers, that's pretty much what the messages are encoded as. So its encoding is designed to make binary data survive transport through transport layers that are not 8-bit clean, such as mail bodies. So this function is used while sending emails, and we can also use a base64 decode to decode a base64 value back to the original value. And let me just give you a quick example here. The secret of the universe is the mother. And then we're gonna encode the text with base64 encode text echo encode. Okay, so this may look familiar if you ever checked mail headers. It's just a long value that doesn't really mean anything. So if we wanted to decode the string back into its original form, we can just use base64 decode code, and that should give us the original string, which is the secret that the universe is the mother. And there it is. So that's it for base64. Let's move on to the next one, which is unserialize. Okay, so unserialize is the opposite of serialize that we covered in 51 to 60 video. So here we use serialize to store the array in a more storable way. So I'm just gonna use the same array that we created here. And so first of all, let's see what the serialized version looks like. You can use serialize spiral dynamics. And so this is what the serialized version looks like. And if we wanted to convert it back into the original form, that's what the unserialize is for. And in this case, it's going to convert it back into the array. So if we did this unserialize, actually we gotta store it first. So we're gonna say serialized equals serialized. Okay, so if we did this, we're gonna say we gotta get a notice array to string conversion because we're getting an array. So we're gonna use our pre-r function to print the array and all its values. Okay, so unserialize converts back to the array, and that's why we're getting our original array back and all of its values. So that's unserialized. Let's move on to the next one, which is max. So max is a very simple function that gets the highest values. So if we had a bunch of values, it's just going to get the highest value, which is 2020 in this case. There it is. So that's max. Let's move on to the next one, which is preg split. So preg split splits string by regular expression, and it returns an array of the values. It takes in a string as a regular expression pattern and string subject, and we can also provide some optional arguments here. So let's see how this works. Okay, so I'm just gonna create a string with a bunch of random words. So we can use preg split to extract all the individual words, and by using that function it will return an array of all of these words as individual key values of the array. So we can say keywords preg split regular expression and subject, which is our words. And for the regular expression, if we wanted to split by the space, we could we'll use /s, and that will split it by space, and we'll return all the words in an array. So you can say pre keywords, and here we get the array of all of the words split by the space. And that's just a simple example. And if we had something more complex, like suppose it's something like a URL that has comma, equal sign, plus sign, and maybe an ampersand. So what we could do here, and this is why PHP Split is very powerful, so we can use a character class and just list all of these characters that we want to split it by. So in this case, it's going to be comma, equal sign, plus, and ampersand. So it's going to use all these characters and consider them delimiters or splitters, and we should get the same array that we did before. Bam. So if I, for example, delete plus and ampersand, you can see that they're still here now because we haven't specified them to split the strings by. And hopefully you can see how that works from this example. We can also optionally provide a third parameter and say 3, and that will limit how many words is going to be splitting. So it's just gonna split the first 3, and then the rest is just going to ignore. So in a case where we had some kind of text and we wanted to limit it by a certain amount, we can use whatever number that we want to limit it by. Otherwise, it's just gonna be default, and it's gonna split all the words that we are searching for. Okay, so that's PHP Split. Let's move on to the next one, which is GetType, and GetType just gets the type of the variable. So if we have an array of a bunch of different types of variables, say we had an array, number, string, double, null, and a class. Then I'm just gonna create the loop to loop through all of these array values for each variables as value. And then echo getType value should give us the type of the value. So we get array, integer, string, double, null, and object, which are all the different types of variables that you see here. And it's pretty useful when we want to check if the variable is a certain type before proceeding to doing something else, and that's why this function is pretty popular. Alright, so the next one is STR Pause, and this function is pretty useful when well, you can get the position of the word in a string. That's its first function, and the second function is just to find the word in a string. So if we wanted to find out the position of the word, say I'm just gonna use these words here for this example. So that will give us the position of the word love, starting from here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9, 10. So how many characters deep is love inside of this string? And it should be something like 20. Yep. So that's how we can get the position of the string inside of the another string. And another useful way is just to see if the word exists. So you can say str pause words love. So if the word is found, it will return true, and then you can say word found, otherwise word not found. Alright, word found. So it's a quick way of finding the word inside of the string. Okay, so that's str pause, and the last function is version compare. So the way to get our current version of PHP is by using a constant PHP version. And I have a version 7.00 RC4. I haven't upgraded to the latest version yet. So what this function does is you can compare your current version of the PHP to another version. And so we can say something like if version compare PHP version, which is our current version, and then we can compare it to 5.0, for example, and we use the operand to specify how to compare the function. So in this case, it's going to see if our current version of PHP is greater than or equal to 5.0, and then we can just say my version of PHP is at least 5.00. Okay, so that's how that works. And that's it for these 10 functions. In the next video, we're going to be continuing covering the next set of PHP functions from 81 to 90. And if you guys like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you next time. Clever Techie out.